Hello everybody. Welcome along. My name's Pip Courtney and I'm from the ABC's Landline program, and I'd like to welcome you to the Climate Challenge. You can hear me? Can you hear me? You're looking really worried, Heidi. That's her face. Carbon credits, carbon farming, climate change, climate variability, they're all big issues and challenges for agriculture, but also, as you'll hear today, opportunities. It's confusing. There's what's happening on the political front, but apart from what's going on in Canberra, there's a lot going on, a lot of information, a lot of programs in ag supported by government and industry bodies like MLA, GRDC, AWI and Dairy Australia. This panel can clarify issues, answer questions and tell you where ag is at the moment and where it's headed. This panel session is brought to you by the Young Carbon Farmers Project, which is a partnership initiative from Sefton and Associates and the Future Farmers Network. And it is supported by funding from the Australian Government. And there's more. Fill out the form, this form, and you get a steak sandwich from the CWA Pavilion, just along there. So Heidi, who's in the blue and pink stripy shirt, she'll collect them and you can go and get your free steak sandwich afterwards. And here you go, guys.
Thank you.
You can earn your keep. Now we have 4 panellists today, and as a reporter, it's really exciting to be able to have 4 people that I just want to talk to and grill and find stories. They're really knowledgeable, top of their game. First up, we have Russell Pattinson. Can you put your hand up, Russell, when you fill out your form? Russell's been in ag for 30 years. He's a consultant and has worked in climate change and variability area. Then next we have Longreach cattle producer Peter Whipp. He's reduced emissions on his property and the boost to his bottom line will stun you. Then Rob Asselman will give you an overview of the Carbon Farming Initiative and how farmers can get projects up to improve their profitability and sustainability. Then Basil Doonan from the MLA-sponsored Farm 300, and I've got some of the cards about Farm 300 down the front, and it starts off by saying, we want 300 beef and sheep meat producers. Do you want to boost livestock production by 10% and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 30%? I can't imagine anybody saying, no, I wouldn't want to do that. So Basil will be next. And then I get to ask... Your idea. No jokes. ABC sound recorders. And then after that, I get to ask questions, but as well questions from the audience, and we're also taking questions from Twitter. Don't be shy, put your hand up. If you want to know something, chances are other people in the audience want to ask those questions. This is a great opportunity to ask people in this new world, people who've researched it, advised, consulted, and like Peter Whipp are doing it every day. Can I ask Russell to come up and kick off proceedings?
Thanks, Pip. And I might just stand down the front if that's okay. What I'd like to talk to you about today is just a few challenges and some opportunities that climate and the weather may poke at us in the future and now. I'd also like to acknowledge Sefton's and Associates and the government for funding this program. Up on the first slide, you'll also see that this project that I'll be talking about, some of the outcomes from that was sponsored by MLA, the government, Dairy Australia, Australian Wool Innovation, and people such as the Department of Ag and CSIRO. So it was a multifaceted organisation. Would you mind? So what I want to talk about is not about one of the other of climate change or climate variability, but talk about challenges. And they'll come in a range of forms in terms of climate changing, in terms of climate variability changing or increasing, and also about extreme events. How do we deal with those sorts of things? 10 days above 40 degrees in the future, or 5 inches in a day. How do we deal with those sorts of things on farm? But the big ticket item is that we hear regularly on news, etc., that the climate's changing, it's going to get hotter, it's going to get drier. But what does that actually mean to a farmer? Because it really doesn't mean a lot until you can drill it down to what it means in your own backyard. So this project that I'll be talking about just briefly this morning, or this afternoon, is talking about that very factor. What do these potential changes actually mean from a productivity point of view, both pasture and livestock, and a profitability point of view? First of all, a bit of context though, and this is not about trying to convince anybody whether climate change is real. You'll make your own mind up about it. But first thing is, over the last 100 years, the average temperature in Australia has increased by about 0.9 degrees. And you can see that from this chart where the yellow and orange colours, they mean increases, and they are across the board. But areas vary. I should say that in the last 7 of the hottest 10 years have taken place in the last 15 years. So those trends are continuing. Rainfall is a bit more difficult. This chart shows what's happened over the last 20 years. This is for the northern season, wet season, and from 1995 on to now. So we're talking that October, April period. And you can see that in the north, there is an indication of increased rainfall in that area over that time. Thanks, Rob. In the south and southern region, rainfall, obviously in the late autumn, winter, springtime, what you can see is that there is a very clear reduction in overall rainfall in that period of time. So this is looking back over the last 20 years. So historically, the last 20 years we've seen some indication of higher rainfall in the north, and certainly an indication of lower rainfall in the south. Where's it going in the future? It's all very well to look back, but looking forward's more difficult. The models suggest that certainly summer rainfall nationally is likely to be pretty neutral, but the big impact is going to be in the autumn-winter period, where most of the models are predicting that we're going to see a reduction in average rainfall, particularly in the south. So that's okay, leave it there. So the question is, these changes that we're experiencing and changes that potentially might be going forward in the future, what's that mean? What's that mean to me as a cattle or a sheep producer in southern parts of Australia? And I know we're right on the cusp of it here, but bear with me. These are the modelling locations. Where those dots are located indicate exactly where the models and the work has been done. Keep going, can you just hit it? That's it. How it worked was that you take individual farmers' data for their soils, their pasture type, their livestock, their profit and loss, and you shove it all into a big program called GrassGrow. It comes out with figures from the period 1970 to 99, the period 2000s where we were all going through a big drought period, and then look forward into the time 2030. What are the key findings? First of all, if you get reduced rainfall and increased temperatures, as it being indicated for a lot of areas of southern Australia, you see a shorter growing season. So as this chart, the green line in particular, a little bit more production in winter. That stops quicker in summer, and therefore overall pasture productivity reduces. The chart in the bottom, your right-hand side, shows data from Hamilton, the number of short springs and long springs. And as you can see, in the last 20 or 30 years, there's been a higher incidence of shorter springs. So both historically and also what's being predicted, spring growth may reduce, but higher in winter. Second key finding was that if you've got lower pasture productivity, the impact on livestock production is also going to potentially reduce. But it's going to reduce in different ways in different areas. It's not just across the board. So, for example, the reductions in pasture productivity in livestock, say for Cootamundra in New South Wales, and I'll give some examples around here in a minute, you're seeing quite considerable changes, 5-17%. If you look at Tasmania and Cressy, then you're actually seeing increases. So what the predictions are saying is that those areas that are low rainfall, higher elevation, cold winters, etc., may indeed benefit from climate change prediction. The other key finding is that even with slight reductions in rainfall, 5 or 10%, that doesn't translate into a 5 or 10% reduction in profitability. Small changes in rainfall can have a big impact. So again, the circled areas are looking around that 5 or 10% reduction in rainfall. The impact on enterprise profitability, sheep and cattle, whether it be for wool or lamb, could be anywhere in the range of 20 to 40%. So small changes in rainfall, big impacts in profit. But again, it is not universal, and there are areas that will benefit. Overall, or in general, the areas that are likely to be impacted by the modelling greatest will be the marginal sort of interface between sheep cereal production. So where you see the red and the orange areas inland, they're the ones that will probably be impacted more. The coastal, higher elevated, cooler climate areas along the divide and in Tasmania, for example, potentially will have no change or indeed an increase. So I suppose the story is so far, yes, the predictions are that a changing and more variable climate may have negative implications for pasture productivity, livestock productivity and profitability in some areas or a number of areas across the country. There are other areas that can see some benefits coming from it. But the key point is that these changes can be addressed by adaptations. And adaptations, as everybody as a farmer has done over the last 20 years or over the last 50 years, those sorts of adaptations are going to continue to be really important in the future. So we can see here, this is a property in Yass, in New South Wales, a sheep property. Business as usual compared to the period 1970 to 1999. Profitability reduces to 60% is what it was, if you don't change anything in 2030. So 60% profit reduction. But if you use a summer feedlot in those years where you need to, so confinement feeding, not every year, but just in summer when you need to, you can increase your profitability back up to 71% of where it was. If you implement a genetic improvement program, in this case, looking at improvement in fleece weight and reduction in fibre diameter, you can get that up to 86%. But if you put the two together, a feedlot, confinement feeding and also genetic gain, you can get back above what you were 30 years ago. So key message there is that adaptations can make a difference, and a combination of adaptation can actually take you back to where you were. Just locally, and unfortunately we haven't got one or models and results for Lismore, Lismore and Casino, but it probably, the closest I could get was Glen Innes, where the data was had been analysed. As you can see here, the period 2000 to 2009, there was a 10% reduction in rainfall over that period. And that's about the same as what it is for the average of 4 different models on the very right-hand side. So about a 10% reduction in rainfall, about a 10% increase in temperature in 2030. But the pasture production actually goes up. And the reason it goes up is because you're likely to, if the models are right, you're likely to see greater winter growth through higher temperatures, because I suspect at Glen Innes you've got elevated conditions, you've got cold weather in winter, that limits pasture production. Rainfall is high, so you're not going to have a limitation of rain. Therefore, you're actually seeing a positive benefit from it. So this is a better place to make these sorts of talks than some other areas of Australia, I can tell you. And it's all about logical things such as saying, if you're higher elevated, you're restricted in winter from pasture productivity, you get a higher temperature, you're not restricted by rainfall, then you're likely to see some increase. Sorry, I'll finish. As I mentioned, the adaptations that you can put in place to overcome some of these issues, they're not things that are different. They're things that you're dealing with every day. So it's things such as better animal genetics, having a genetic improvement program, They are things such as improving your soil fertility and increasing your pasture productivity, changing your stocking rates and using confinement feeding when you need to, depending on what the seasonal conditions are. The results showed that generally, but not in all cases, changing lambing time or calving time by a short period or a small amount universally wasn't necessarily the right thing, but in certain locations it helps, where you're getting a movement of the season. Altering the pasture base, so going from a C3 to a C4 pasture in those areas, completely changing things around at this time is not necessarily the right thing to do. And certainly, altering the enterprise, jumping from one to another, is not recommended from any of the work that was being done. Last slide. The impacts can be significant in 2030 if the climate predictions are correct. And there's not one future, there's a whole range of them that are being modelled. That's if you do nothing, but people don't do anything. They will adapt. And what you find is that those adaptations can make a difference, can get back into where you were, but it's not just a silver bullet, there's not one answer, it's a multitude of answers. Thank you.
Thanks, Russell. And now if we could ask Peter Whipp to come and give us his speech.
Yeah, we run cattle out there. We run about 1,000 breeders and probably about 2,000 to 2,500 head all up, I suppose. Yeah, and I was just going to talk a little bit about this. I'm a part of the Climate Champions program. Anyone heard of that here? No? There's about 40 of us around Australia, 40 farmers, and the idea of that program is that we have input into the whole sort of climate change debate a bit. You know, farmers are seen a bit as being a bit reluctant to embrace climate change, a little bit sort of sceptical maybe. And so there's about 40 of us around Australia that are charged with getting involved in the debate and talking to our peers, trying to have some input into research too, to see what research gets onto the ground. And yeah, we found it really effective. The reason why I got involved was, I don't know if you ever saw those ads up here, or down here, but we used to get this ad up there on TV, and it was the world exploding basically, and it had a cow sitting on top. I don't know, did you get those ads? Is that just a Queensland thing? No. Well, basically what I was saying was, you know, cows are pretty much destroying the world. Pretty much was what it was. And guess who paid for that? Vegetarian group. Anyway, that's why we got involved, because we sort of felt like there was so much in the media about, gee, these cows are terrible and they're, you know, burping and farting and doing all the bad things and they're a terrible thing. And so I thought, well, hey, we can't just sit back and let that be the only story that gets told. So we wanted to sort of get on the other side of that. So, right. Yeah, that'd be good. Look, that's just before you go.
Oh, sorry.
That's not what you think of when you think of Longreach. What do you think of Longreach normally? Dry, hot. You know, you've probably seen all the drought photos and the YouTube clips and all the other rubbish. That's Longreach there in a good season. Beautiful. Yep. Go for the next one. So where we live is. So it's just there, right in the middle of Queensland, pretty much. And you can tell that's a rainfall chart. So what does that tell you about living in Longreach? Drought's pretty normal sort of thing. So, you know, we were just talking a bit last night about how often the only thing people hear about Western Queensland is when there's a drought or another drought or the last drought or the next drought. But reality is that's, you know, you're in a pretty dry environment. That's fact of life, you know. So you're going to, there's positives with that, like we don't get worms and we don't get all the ticks and all the other stuff. So, you know, there's pros and cons. But the reality is we're in a dry place, and so we have to adapt to that. I mean, there's no news in that, no rocket science. People have been doing that for the last 100 years. So in terms of that, managing that type of environment, very variable, rainfall, all that sort of stuff. Yep. Okay, this again, Longreach. You're going to go with a whole different idea of Longreach after this, aren't you? Everyone's just booking their ticket. They're on the way there probably before the end of the talk. That's another place there. Changing climate, like, you know, farmers, you know, there's a lot of stuff in the media about climate change and, you know, what it all means and whatever. And often as farmers, I think we sort of go, well, gee, you know, well, look, Here's an example I just heard later. They used to tell us that butter was bad for us, didn't they? Now it's great. Have you heard that? That's the new news. You can go for butter. It's good. So there you go. Scientists are not always right, but I guess what I'm saying as a farmer is, it's hard for us to think about what might happen in 2030 or 2050. Now, we've really got to survive probably the next 3 to 5 years. Is that pretty right? Well, certainly for us, that's where we focus. Can we make it through the next drought or the one after that? What have we got to do to manage for that? So for us, I guess, we probably put more time and effort into adapting to what's already happening rather than trying to plan for the next 50 years. With farmers, again, like there is a lot of scepticism around it, all that sort of stuff, but like most people know what's going on, and this is a graph, say, from Birdsville, which is a bit further west than us, but that's what's happened since the 1960s. So the last 50 years or so, the number of days over 35 degrees, that's measured. I don't have to try and sort of say, oh, that might happen, or that's a model or whatever. That's what's actually happened since the 60s. So if you were smart, you'd be able to draw a line through there that sort of says the trend is up in temperature. Like rainfall, no one knows what happens in rainfall in Western Queensland. It's all over the place. But that temperature is pretty clear that it's going up. Now, what brought it home to us this last year, we had a pretty hot summer. And normally in Longreach, we get a couple of days that are sort of in those, 45 to 50 degrees. Sometimes you get 2 in a row and everyone has a whinge and, it says how bad it is or whatever. This year we had 10 days where it was between 46 and 50 degrees consistently for 10 days straight. And what we found is we lost quite a number of cattle in that time that weren't poor, that weren't dying because they were light in condition. They simply just was too hot. And this is something like, it really sort of gave us a bit of a fright. We've done a bit of looking around trying to find out why is this, and there's stuff from America that says that once you get over 35 degrees, dry matter intake goes down. And for us, that's nearly, probably 4 or 5 months of the year it's over 35 degrees. Now our cattle are probably better adapted than the American cattle. So I'm happy that, maybe we don't get that as much. But certainly once you get over 40 degrees on the American data, dry matter intake is down by 46%. So basically that means they're just not eating. So what's happening there is at that time of the year, pasture quality is poor generally. At the end of the year, we're waiting for the wet season. Cattle are starting to calve, so the energy requirements are going through the roof. And then once we get these really extreme temperature events like that, dry matter intake starts to shut down. And that's what we firmly believe has caused us to lose some of those cattle. I mean, if they'd all been, walking skeletons like the drought pictures you've probably seen, well, maybe you'd say, well, that's what happens. But they were actually in good order, most of those cattle, for the season. And we lost cattle that we didn't expect to. And that was pretty consistently across our area. And talked to a lot of people that have been in the area for forever. Haven't seen that sort of heat before, not 10 days straight of that. And most people said that 2 weeks of that temperature was like an extra 2 months of drought. So it basically, did that sort of damage. So what can we do? It's all very well to talk about it and say, well, that mightn't happen again for another 10 years, and I hope it doesn't. But, it could happen next year. And I think some of the things that we've got to look at as farmers in Western Queensland is certainly infrastructure. So water is key for us. Like Western Queensland, it's a pretty big country. A lot of paddock sizes. 5,000 acres, probably not unreasonable for a paddock size. 5 or 6 kilometres to water is traditional. That's too much. Like that might have been okay when things weren't as hot as they have been. We get to these sort of heats, temperatures, we've got to improve that. So improving that infrastructure definitely is the key. Management, we're talking about maybe different land types out there you maybe have to stop breeding on. Maybe go back to bullocks or something, or go back just to trade cattle or something like that. It may become too hot that we won't be able to breed in some of that country. You can see that some of that country, that block we've actually sold that, but it's a nice photo, so I kept the photo. A lot of pretty open sort of country, as you can see, and you imagine 46 degrees sitting out there, and it's not green normally at that time of the year. So, management might mean that we have to change the way we do things, might have to change the timing of things, like maybe calving, like most people try to calve there about sort of November, December, January, so that the calf's hitting the ground just before the green grass hits, and that's sort of manage the nutritional side of it. But that might mean that we might have to change that and look at feeding and different other things, as time goes on. But the big thing, and probably what I really want to talk about, is animal efficiency. If your animal, we have to really breed an animal that's adapted to that country. Now, I'm going to tell you something. You're going to think I'm an idiot if you don't already, but this is going to be separate. We actually use Angus bulls. We get Angus bulls from New South Wales, Hazeldean, some of them come up into our country. Now, what colour are Angus bulls? Black. Black, 46 degrees, does that go well together? No. No wonder that we lost the state of origin, really. Not very smart up in Queensland. But the reason we do that is we're actually joining our heifers as yearlings. Now, for you guys down here, that's probably so what? But I imagine your yearling would probably be a lot heavier than our yearlings. Like we're talking probably about 280 kilo heifer. We're joining them. And so that's why we're using Angus bulls, to really keep that birth weight down. So, I mean, what's a joining weight for a heifer in casino? 300 kilos? Yep, right. Yep. So we're in Western Queensland, that's pretty sort of cutting edge. You know, we're a couple of hundred years behind you guys down here. So for us, joining those heifers consistently at that weight changes the whole gross margin of the business. And we've got some figures we're going to put up shortly. But that's a real key to saying, well, look, you probably, I don't know, up where we come, you know, we'll often have a talk like this, and economists will come and talk, and they'll say, you fellas can't afford to breed. Can't afford to breed. Do they say that down here? No? Right. Up where we are, they just can't afford, the economics of breeding just don't work. You know, we should just be trading cattle. That's what we should be doing to make profits. But what we've found is that's based on the traditional model of breeding. And I agree with them. If you go with the traditional time up there, which normally you'd hold your heifer till 2-year-old, join her as a 2-year-old, get your first calf on the ground at 3. So you can imagine there's quite a lot of dead weight in a business model like that. So that's probably the big thing we're doing. We're really focusing on keeping our breeder size down. Now I went over and had a look at some of the judging over there, and just like every other cattle show I've ever been to, which cow wins the ribbon? The big, fat, heavy one. Is that right? Right. Now, that's great for shows and it looks good in the country life and whatever, but in terms of actual animal efficiency and feed conversion, we can't afford to have those cows run around the paddock. And so we firmly believe, look, we've got our breeder size down, and we reckon it's around 20% lower than average. And partly that's because we want to be efficient. So we've only got a limited amount of grass, so we want to turn that grass into as many calves as we can. And that's part of what we're doing. Okay, so next one. Next. We've been doing a project with Melbourne Uni. Now, I don't know why we're in Queensland. I don't know why we're doing a project with Melbourne Uni, but that's obviously the way it's worked. And basically, they've been just looking at what we're doing up there. Now, we didn't start what we're doing because of emissions. We started it because of profit. You know, we had to borrow money to buy our places, and basically we had to service that money. And we wanted to make as much profit as we can to try and get out of debt as quickly as we could. So we had it from an efficiency point of view. When they came and looked at it from an emissions point of view, they found that, so we're on the bottom line there, we're on the bottom, and then we've got two different other scenarios. The top line is pretty much the average sort of operation for our area, what would be a typical sort of operation. The big thing from my point of view is our gross margin is a bit more than double the average because of pretty much this focus on efficiency. So we're looking at fertility firstly and trying to keep our breeder size down, so early joining. That's the two big things we're doing. But from an emissions point of view, our emissions intensity, which is that next column there, now emissions intensity means how much emission per kilo of beef produced. So we probably produce as much emissions or maybe even more than some of our neighbours because we're running pretty big numbers, but our emissions per kilo of beef is 24% less than average. So in theory, we should be able to say that our beef is much more climate friendly than anyone else's because there's less emissions per steak on your plate, if that makes sense. And the bottom, I guess the interesting part was we didn't have to sacrifice production or profit to do it. We've actually nearly doubled profit by doing that at the same time. Next. Look, that's all I was going to say. We love producing beef, you know, and you know, often we hear all the negative things about farmers and how bad farmers are and whatever, but we love our cows, we love running them and love eating beef as well, which hopefully we'll get a steak sandwich later, we'll be able to check it out, but that's my wife and a couple of our mad cattle from Longreach. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Rob Asselman, who's going to talk about the Carbon Farming Initiative. You're going to wander?
My name's Rob Asselman. I work for an organisation called Climate Friendly. We've been funded by the federal Government Department of Ag to, I guess, come up with a website or a resource that's easy for you guys to access, that brings a lot of the knowledge that these guys here, we don't every day have a wealth of knowledge like these three blokes here to bring this to the table. So the idea is that this website's a trusted resource where you can learn about the CFI in a very easy, I guess, non-technical way. There's a lot of information, as I said, going out there, but sometimes it starts at quite a technical level or in a very governmental speak kind of level, and this just brings it down, it makes it more conversational, and it brings in the resources of people like the MLA, the Cotton Council, Dairy Australia, Pork Australia, and some of the big universities like Melbourne Uni, etc. So I'll just run you through very briefly some of the features, and then I'll be here for the panel and also here to have a chat later on. So we've broken the site up into 5 separate areas, and that is, what is the CFI? Can I participate? How do I participate? CFI projects, and who do I contact? Now, the top 3 are pretty self-explanatory. The bottom 2, I think, are probably where the real value is at. Some people ask me the question, it's quite common, is this actually happening? Is the CFI a real thing? Are there farmers actually doing it? And the answer is yes, and I'll show you very shortly. And of course, who do I contact? There's so much information out there, and there's a lot of people that have, as I said, great research and are a great resource. So the who do I contact section actually provides you with the phone number of these people, the email address of these people, so you can ring them directly and actually ask for either financial advice or a rural financial counsellor or someone who's developed projects, or perhaps guys like these. Try to keep it nice and simple and nice and easy, because you guys are pretty time poor trying to manage your farms out there. So all the resources are broken down into 5 separate sections, and then sections underneath that. So if you're a cattle farmer, like some of these guys up here are, you just need to look for the picture of the bull, and you're pretty sorted for cattle information. And if you're a dairy farmer, look for the dairy cow. If you're a sugarcane grower or a cotton farmer, information that relates to you will have a picture of those things. So it's just really easy. You can have a cuppa and sit down after a big day and maybe take 10 minutes, and it'll be pretty quick. This is my second to last slide, I think, so I'm going to be quite quick. This is just a bit of a screenshot of our site. We've got a map of Australia, so you can see that these are the projects that are really happening. There's over 125 CFI projects that are actually happening in Australia right now, and they've issued about 6 million or so carbon credits. So some of these are farmers like you people here that have done that have investigated, done some research, spoken to the right people, and have got good returns on their farm. It's not going to be for everyone, like any type of farm solution, but it is a real thing, and it's really happening. So we've got some case studies there on the right there of that you can take away or print off or download and have a look at. And this is just a quick screenshot. Try to keep things very easy. This is the directory. It works similar to a yellow pages or a white page online or a Google. You can type in the type of person you're looking for, or a particular company, or for example, look up, I need an environmental consultant to come down and give me a hand, or I'm looking for what industry associations can help me out. Obviously, people like MLA are pretty obvious. If there's media or press out there that you've read an article about in the Land or QCL or something like that, you might want to get in touch with them. People who can audit your project. So basically, it's a one-stop shop for those people that can actually help you out and have real experience, which I think is the most important thing. So that's in my presentation. As I said, it'd be great for me if you'd visit the website. I think it is a pretty helpful resource. All the contact details are there. So thank you very much.
And next we have Basil Doonan up to talk.
Which one are you?
Thanks very much, Pip. I've just been asked to come up and give you a bit of background to our project, which is Farm 300. And I guess Farm 300 is taking the information that's being presented here in terms of what is happening and what's likely to happen, and then looking at, well, how do you put strategies in place, like Peter's done, to capitalise on the profit side of it and then potentially dealing with the environmental outcomes. So our project is based around boosting livestock production efficiency at the same time as reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So exactly what Peter's done on his own farm. In terms of quantifying that, we want to deliver programs that lift farm profitability by about 10% and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by around 30%. And by greenhouse gas emissions, we're talking about the intensity, the same information that Peter put up there. So we're quite happy to hold the level of total emissions, but we want more productivity around that. Project partners are, of course, Meat and Livestock Australia was successful in obtaining the funding. Australian Farm Institute, we're using their greenhouse gas model. Australian Wool Innovation and Dairy Australia. Obviously, we've got a steering committee that's primarily experts in the field of environment, primary producers and representatives from the partner organisations. What's Farm 300? So we'll work with advisors and producers. So we have an amount of money to train advisors in the area of coaching. We're looking at a coaching-based model because a lot of the things that Peter put up there around the what he's done differently, so early mating and efficiency type stuff, you just can't expect people to implement on their farms. There's skill development that has to go along with that. How do we know that skill development's important? Well, as an industry, we've audited people over a very long period of time. What we generally find is that if we go to the average farm, and that's that farm that Peter put up there as being average in his district, you go to the dairy industry, meat industry, wool industry, grains industry, mixed cropping industry, it's always the same. If you audit around the level of skills that you require to do a 5 to 8% return on capital, and you ask questions around that, you'll find that most primary producers have about half the level of capability necessary. So here's just some average skills auditing data that we've collected in this particular instance in the dairy industry. And you can see in those key areas around technical management, which is cows and grass for you guys, and business management, about 30 to 50% of the skills required. In that instance, it was a return to capital of 4%, just happened to be an incredibly high milk price year. However, if we look at the top producers, the top 10% of producers, you can see that technical management and business management is incredibly high, and they're the two key areas that drive the business. And in that particular year, a return on capital of 16%. It's nearly always the difference between average and the top 10% is around 300 to 400% better for the top 10%. So implementing strategies like Peter put up there, obviously a doubling of gross margin, probably a quadrupling of business profit. So we know that you can't just go and make those things happen on farm. We know that farming systems are complex. We know that they're set in a leaky environment, and so we need to be able to provide support. So, I mean, if we send farmers and put farmers through workshops and we expect them to walk out the other end of that and implement, then we're pretty naive. So we don't expect kids to go to school and come home and not do homework and not practice, nor should we expect primary producers to do that either. In terms of just what is skill development's, again, it's not something that you get overnight, so it requires practice. And I think the experts would say something like between 2,000 and 10,000 repetitions. So this is not this guy's first day on the job. He didn't walk down there this morning and say, I want to be a brickies labourer in Bangladesh. He's had years of practice. He's probably lost a couple of toenails in the process. But ultimately, if you keep going with the practicing, then the skill development results. So what we've set up around in Farm 300 is a coaching process to support people in implementing these new skills on their businesses. So around the advisor side, we've got 25 coaches that have been selected out of our workshops. Workshops have now been run. We're looking at running 6 to 8 coaching sessions on farm to help farmers implement new skills into their businesses. We're looking for 300 medium to large livestock producers. We haven't got a definition of what's medium to large, so everybody's welcome. In terms of the resources, we've got the online climate hub, we've got MyCFI, we've got a whole heap of tools at our disposal, we've got webinars, but most importantly, there will be coaches on farm helping farmers implement. So I guess, as Peter said again, it's good business management, and if there's really good environmental outcomes as a result of that, what odds? Thank you.
Now we get to ask some questions. Okay. would you want me to sit up there? Thanks, everyone. Okay, so have a think about some questions you'd like to fire these guys, and I'll dole out some Freddos later. But I'd like to start with a first question to Rob. You have a section on your site that highlights businesses already into carbon farming. Is there money to be made out of the CFI, and how are these businesses doing it? Tell us a story.
Is this on? Yep. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I guess the short answer is yes, that there is. And there, as I showed you from the map, there's about 125 projects spread around Australia that have. But I guess it's like a lot of, opportunities within farming. There's never one new piece of technology or new system or new idea or new piece of equipment that's going to be suitable for all types of farmers, whether you're a cattle farmer or a dairy farmer or a broadacre cropper or whatever else you're up to. So I think the key is actually doing your research and finding out if there is an opportunity in there for you to make a financial return. But that being said, there's nearly everything that these three guys talked about that have got a lot more experience than I do, is that the focus should be on improving the efficiency in your farm. And things like, if you've got pasture, it's things like, if you're running your farm at best practice, your pasture's going to be better, so then your end result's going to be better, your water input's less, your energy input's less, those type of things. So I don't think carbon credits are the only game in town, and I don't think they should even be the most important game in town. I think it's all those things about best practice and efficiency that are the most important.
So that's where you see the benefits first up.
I think first up, and also for the long term. Legislation changes, and as we see now, there's a bit of toing and froing in Parliament about what's going to happen with carbon and direct action policy versus carbon farming initiative, etc. But the thing is, if you can control the best practice on your farm, that's completely in your domain, and it doesn't matter what's happened really from a legislative perspective, you're getting a better return.
So is there one project that you could tell the audience here that sticks in your mind about something that a farmer has done so they end up with a better bottom line, but also in the emissions world, which is going to increasingly become part of farming, that they get a tick in that column as well?
Yeah, I think it's a bit difficult because the opportunities for cattle graziers is a bit limited, so it's a bit hard playing to this audience. So I'm sorry, but the easy example, I guess, is piggeries. And if anyone owns pigs, and I've spoken to a few people around here who've got pigs as a bit of a side project in their farm system, but you've got concentrated waste within a piggery, and you've also got big energy inputs for things like heat pads and pumps and things like that. So you basically, to be completely blunt, in that type of system, your pig crap actually becomes the source of your energy. You're capturing the pig gas, you're pumping it back in, you're burning it to create electricity, which is great for efficiency, brings your power bills down, which are going crazy at the moment, and you're potentially getting carbon credits. So that's a quick example anyway.
And if we can go to Peter, based on your experience with extended droughts, debt management, and the way that you've shifted your breeding management practices, what should the key motivating factor for farmers be when they're looking at emissions reduction? Should it be about bottom line? Should it be about carbon emissions? What is the motivating thing for you?
Yeah, look, I think for most farmers, the bottom line and the first line has to be about profit, and that's really linked to efficiency. In whatever operation, however you're structured, whatever you do here, it's got to be about trying to make as much money from every bit of grass that you've got. And then the spin-off of that is, if you're productive and efficient, well, then you'll actually be effective and efficient from an emissions point of view as well. It's a real win-win. You don't have to lock up the farm and get rid of all your cows and sheep to still be an efficient, at managing emissions. You can actually be productive, profitable, and still manage emissions.
So do you find now you think differently? You're thinking about emissions? Like, I suspect that you wouldn't have farmed like that 15 years ago, thinking about emissions.
Well, look, to be honest, probably I still think about making a dollar first, and if there's a spin-off and you can do that in an environmentally friendly way, in whether that's, weeds, whether that's managing your land, whether it's emissions, well, that's a bonus. But But to be honest, and maybe I'm not green enough or whatever, but I focus firstly on making a profit. Once I've done that, if I can do that in a good way, well, that's a bonus.
But you found that reducing emissions is actually a profitable way to farm.
Yeah, it is. Like I mean, there's some data around, and I'm not a scientist or expert, but whatever we lose in emissions is really a lost opportunity. It's lost production. So what we want to try and do is maximise our production for whatever we've got to emit. That's for me, that's the bottom line. So if we can do that and do it efficiently, that'll fix pretty much everything. It'll fix the bank manager. He'll be happy. And then if we can actually do that in a way that's the lowest possible emissions intensity, we're still going to feed the world and still going to hopefully have a planet left at the end of it.
So that'd be the take-home message if you were yarning to other cattlemen at the Longreach cattle yards and they were going, what's this climate champion stuff about? That sentence you just said really sums it up, doesn't it?
Yeah. Look, the reality is, I mean, there's been some examples around, where we just shut things down, get rid of all the production, and that'll be environmentally friendly, and like that's just a load of bull dust as far as I'm concerned. We can't survive, doing that. Sorry.
And if I can turn to you, Russell, with your work on the Southern Livestock Adaptation Project, you had access to some pretty up-to-date key info about the predicted impacts on climate variation. What would be the one change that farmers could make today to increase productivity and reduce their vulnerability?
Yeah, thanks, Pip. Look, I think the key message I'd like to put across is that I get concerned when you turn on TVs or radios and all the time it's talking about climate change and the impacts in a broad sense, but from a farming perspective you really need to drill down on what it means on your own place. So the message I'd like to get across today is that there is information now out and about that allows you to go and have a look at your own location, granted in southern Australia. If anybody wants to take it down, there's a website called www.sla2030 that allows you to do that. So it's really about, one, being aware that there is this information around. Two, that yes, there are going to be challenges thrown up. But three is that there are strategies and adaptations that can be put in place that can help either make that opportunity even better or remove some of the negative downsides. So rather than saying every farm's different, I couldn't say you've all got to do this or you've all got to do that, but check out what's available. I understand that there is information now around and that these adaptations can be done that are best practice now.
So I suppose having a plan could be one thing that every farmer did.
Yeah, look, I think that it's an old adage and things, and I don't want to trot it out again, but the best way to be profitable in the future is to do the right things today.
Can you clarify what you mean by the no regret option?
Yeah, no regret options is that, or adaptations, are the things that I spoke about. Things like having a genetic improvement program in place, things such as looking at your soil fertility so that you're improving your pasture productivity for livestock thing. They're no regret options because if you put those in place today, they will benefit you. They'll benefit you if the climate does change. They'll benefit you if the climate doesn't change. And so therefore they're no regrets, they're not a problem. I'll just use a stupid example, but if you said, oh, look at all these climate predictions about how things are going to change, I'm going to get out of cattle and I'm going to go into gnu's or water buffalo or something, with respect to water buffalo and gnu's. But then the climate doesn't change. And then you're left with a paddock full of different animals that aren't suited. So that's what I mean about no regrets.
So is Peter the poster boy for the no regret options?
No regret, Peter. Yeah, I mean, look, it's a very good case because he's just shown in a very practical sense what he does, what the impacts are on his profitability, and what the impacts are on his emissions. Now, if the challenging environment that he lives in, if things continue to change, he's going to be far better situated and presented to deal with those changes, positive or negatively.
Okay, and Basil, I think it's time we asked you a question. Why have you gone for the advisor model?
The advisor coaching model, two reasons. That farming businesses are among some of the most complex you can deal with. So people, animals, climate, soils, all those sorts of helicopters. all those sorts of things, and they're set in a really dynamic and leaky environment as well. So it's a cat herding operation, managing a farming business, and getting it to go generally where you want it requires a really high degree of skill in some key areas. We know that people don't develop skill by just sitting through a workshop or coming to something like this today. They might get some knowledge, some insights, but no skill development. So the way you get skill development is having a coach who helps you practice. So if we don't have coaches out there helping people, we'll actually take most businesses in the opposite direction. So what is important, what in inverted commas is important, so some of the things that Peter's doing, but what's far more critically important is how he's going about it. So if we just early mate all these cattle, lift the intensity of the business, have the same fixed level of capability, it'll go worse. So we have to support people through those changes. So there's a whole heap of things that, you know, if the season goes against him, he'll have a destocking policy, he'll have all those things that with a coach we can capitalise on the improved productivity. Without a lift in skill, we'll go in the opposite direction.
And how will sheep and beef producers get access to these coaches? How are they going to be spread around the country? How do people find them?
Okay, so it's almost a reverse model on that at this point in time. We've actually now trained the advisors, so 150 advisors are being trained. They'll be encouraged to put forward an expression of interest around a group and around a topic that will lift productivity profit by about 10% and reduce emissions intensity by 30%. It's good, pretty much those two go hand in hand anyway. But if people wanted to or had a group, we can certainly provide the advisors that are trained in their area to them.
10% increase in profits, 30% decrease in emissions. That's pretty ambitious. Do you think it's achievable? Because you've also got a very short time frame, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. What we're actually charged with is lifting the skill level to a certain level that would result in those improvements in profit and reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. We don't have to see the change on farm within our time frame, so we've got to see the change in skill that will lead to that, but we don't have to see the change in those indicators necessarily.
Rob, when I think about the first stories I did on carbon farming, they were about soil carbon and building that up, and you'd be talking about decades, and farmers would be talking about, well, when my great-grandson, you know, gets to take the benefit of what I'm doing now, or tree planting, which is long-term, are there short-term things that farmers can implement where they might start getting a benefit within 12 months?
Yeah, I think that there are. I mean, there's a lot of long games in town, and things like soil carbon look to be that way. And there's other things you can do. Like I know, for example, we've worked pretty closely with some farmers between sort of Ningen and Burt kind of area about they had some big forests on their land, and they had the permit to clear it, and they decided not to clear it, and that was eligible under the Carbon Farming Initiative, and they've been able to generate carbon credits from that. So that's relatively short term, like in a matter of months rather than years. Planting's quite a labour-intensive way to generate carbon credits. I mean, to get out there and actually bend your back and plant seedlings, or to use, you know, farming machinery to do that, it's expensive and it's time consuming, but it still can be economically viable. So I think it's, from a soil carbon perspective, at the moment it's a little bit up in the air because, as I mentioned before, legislation sort of potentially changing, and I think Parliament are actually speaking about it this week. So I think we'll have to sort of, it's a bit of a suck it and see approach. We'll have to see what happens, and I guess try and stay abreast of what's going on. And, you know, there's always articles in the Land about this, and, you know, these guys are, I guess, available, and there's the site as well. So I know that's a little bit of a weasel word way to answer that question, but it's a little bit up in the air at the moment.
Okay. I don't know who wants to answer this one, but in the new financial year, there's going to be new legislation on July 1. Do things change in the carbon farming, climate change, variability world? Is that one for you, Russell? Or more, Rob?
I'll probably jump on that one. It looks like most likely at some stage within the next sort of 6 to 12 months things will change, and as I said before, Parliament's talking about these things now, and it's a little bit up in the air. Clive Palmer's sort of talking about a few things, and we don't know where it's going to go, to be honest. But I guess the only thing that's certain is that things are uncertain. which is unfortunately often the case. But I think things will change. Personally, I think things will change, and I think it's just a matter of finding your trusted resources, whoever you're speaking to, whether it's colleagues or neighbours that you've got, and people that you think are pretty switched on, and learning about that, and also finding trusted people and trusted resources. MLA are really good for things like that. They're releasing research all the time to keep you up to date, and get in contact with me or get in contact with these guys. Happy to have a chat at any stage on phone or email or whatever it may be.
Is it fair to say that no matter who's in power in Canberra, though, that the incoming, or the current government is committed to reducing emissions, and there are projects and programs and funding out there. So no matter what happens on July 1, ag is not forgotten. There's going to be a lot of activity in this space. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And the coalition, the Nationals and the Liberals and Labor, it's had bipartisan support, the Carbon Farming Initiative. Both parties are keen to support the rural community and the ag community from this perspective. They're going about it in different ways, but that's always been supported, and that will continue to be so. Is definitely what the mail is.
And Peter, have you found that, farmers love watching the early adopters, the people who go first. They sit back and wait to see whether you succeed or fail. Are you finding that you're getting the message out because it's dry where you are, or you're in drought? Are your methods now being talked about? What's the curiosity factor of what you're doing?
Yeah, like, when you do something new, like everyone looks back to wait so they can have a laugh and it all falls apart, I suppose. But, I think change happens a lot quicker when there's a big pressure, whether that's a financial pressure, so, when there's debt involved, or when there's seasonal pressure. And I think probably the guys that would look at what we're doing and be interested are under those sort of two pressures. Normally they're saying, well, look, we need to be more profitable just to be able to service our debt and go forward, or the impact of the drought is starting to make people think about all of those things we put up, about what we can do to manage the next drought that might be a bit worse than this one and that sort of thing. So look, I think, this might be a generalisation, but often if you're really well off and you've got no debt and you don't have a lot of pressure, well, you don't have to change, do you? So I think the guys that look at new things, often they're the ones that there's some pressure there driving them, or even succession. You might have 6 kids waiting to sort of push out of the way. Well, that's sometimes a pressure that you have to improve and go further. Yeah.
And Basil, do you think having an advisor coaching a group, that's going to get that message out pretty quickly, as people working in a group, they all talk, and your pressure may not be drought, but it's going to be getting it done in that time frame. Was it 2015 you've got to try and hit those numbers?
Yes, we've got a pretty short time horizon, but I've spent 20 years in this space of looking at what the best farmers do, and more critically how they do it differently, and I've seen those changes in skill development occur in 12, 18 months. There's always got to be some pressure for change, but I agree with Peter, it's always profits number one, and when I look at the top 10% in any industry, anywhere in Australia, anywhere in the world, they do not have compromised lifestyles and they do not have compromised environmental outcomes. In fact, it's almost without exception the reverse of that. And if you think about it, like lifestyle and the environment always start with a profit, so you can do something about it.
And Russell, you were saying something earlier when we were having a chat about what the best farmers do. So are the best farmers the best advertisement for not getting alarmed about climate change, climate variability?
Yeah, look, I think it's hard to classify the best farmers. Obviously, profitability is a pretty good indicator. But within all of those things, that I think that it is a case about just being aware of what information is available, whether it's about the CFI or about coaches that are helping, or about some case studies like Pete is doing. They're the sort of areas that you can come along, and also I think farmers love learning from other farmers, and so case studies, being aware of what is going on in other places can really help to make it. It's all very well for us to talk, but I'm sure people in the audience are going to get a lot more out of listening to Peter talk than others.
And what would you say is the take-home message start with Peter. What's the take-home message you'd like everybody in the audience, if you could just sum it up even in one tweet or one comment, what would it be?
Yeah, look, for us, it's that efficiency, you know, focus on efficiency. If you've got efficient animals, well, you'll be doing a good job and that'll tick all the boxes, you know. And sorry, I just really like the model that, doing a bit of a plug for Basil here, I really like that idea. You know, like often, you know, when you're trying to teach someone to drive a new car, you don't just whack them in it and say, here, away you go, see ya. Like there's that training, and I reckon that's something that agriculture really needs, that mentoring or coaching sort of thing to help us sort of get something new happening. I love it.
So Basil, you get one chance to get one message out.
My take-home message is the harder it gets and the more variable it gets, the bigger the return there will be on being able to manage it. So if this place were burning down, we'd want to pay a lot of money to a fireman and very few other people. So if you're a good manager, a good business manager, and the environment gets more challenging, there will be more return and more opportunity.
Okay. Russell, what about you?
Yeah, Pip, my take-home message is just that there is information around in a whole range of sources that can help demystify some of the stuff that you constantly see in the media and in just general discussions. So being able to drill down to your own situation.
And Rob, before we were talking, you came up with a great insurance analogy. Can you tell the audience about that one?
Yeah, I think the whole climate change debate. I mean, you insure, most people I would suggest, you insure your house every year against fire and theft, and the chance of your house burning down or getting robbed is probably much less than 1 in 100, probably 1 in 1,000, I don't know, but it's very, very low, and yet you pay that insurance bill every year. Now, the science suggests that the probability of this happening is infinitely higher than that. So let's just get into these best practice ideas, and you're going to get things like all those extra added efficiency. And like the worst case scenario is you get the type of benefits that these guys are seeing. What's better than that, really?
Do we have any questions of the panel? Okay, let's do this Freddo Frog thing.
Yes, can hear me. Yeah. I'd welcome your comment, Peter, on this. I guess it's an analogy. I'm thinking of what comes to mind with farming, particularly in difficult areas, is like the car industry. The car industry is lingered on and on and on, and eventually it's going. I'm thinking about farming on the margins. You look at, it was only last Christmas we saw a drought and the impact of animals dying and the heartbreak that come to families. And recently, properties, particularly out in the Roma Strip, where, because of drought, the banks have just gobbled them up. So I'm wondering, will there come a time, if we accept that the weather patterns are going to continue and we're going to have tough times, particularly for farmers, where we'll have to accept that we can no longer farm on the margins because of climate, cost of production, and soils, ageing soils? I'd welcome your comment.
Yeah, look. I think what you're saying that highlights a couple of things. Like often the news that we see about farmers is all of the doom and gloom. Now, I'm probably going to, hopefully I don't upset too many people, but a lot of the images you saw in that drought probably should never have happened anyway. They weren't caused by the drought; they were caused by poor management. Now, still alive after I said that. So yeah, so I mean you're right. Like I think what will happen first would be that some of that management either drops out of the industry or improves to a level where we don't see that. That's not good for anybody, not even from a farmer. You know, we were in that same drought as everyone else, and you know, I think I think there's some things that need to change, and this idea that we show all those pictures all the time and say, oh, look, you know, how tough it is for farmers. Well, a lot of farmers look at those pictures and say, well, hang on, how did you get to there? You know, so some of that's about management, because, you know, you saw those photos. I mean, you know, that's not marginal country. We're a low rainfall, like probably around that sort of, you know, in theory we're about 14 inches, but it's sort of probably 8 to 10 most of the time. I think you can run a really sustainable business in that sort of environment. We don't use chemicals, we don't plough the soil, we don't use fertiliser. You know, to me, that's a pretty balanced, sustainable system. You're right. I'm sure there are areas where what you're talking about would apply to, where say you might be farming and you know. I mean, I've been to the Mallee and some of those areas, and I struggle to get my head around all those piles of chemical drums, you know, but I mean, that's just where we come from. But so yeah, you're probably right. But for our area, look, I see a bright future for where we are. Like, I can't see any dramas. Like, things are going to change, and I mean, things have changed. I don't know, you know, like, I think I like that idea of no regret options. Like, I wouldn't change one thing even if no one had even mentioned climate change. What we're doing now is, you know, it's profitable, it's efficient, it's enjoyable. It's actually less management intensive once you're up and running than doing a traditional sort of way of farming. So I think the traditional way of farming probably has to go. You know, I think management has to change to hit what you're talking about.
Yeah, Craig Turner, Queensland Rural Adjustment Authority. Whippy, you're in the clear, although I'm revoking your passport. You've paid out on Queensland too much. You're not welcome back. I'm also glad to hear about the property that you sold, seeing we financed the buyer into it. So I'm glad we got longevity there. My question's to Rob. I'm a little concerned at how quickly you dismiss carbon credits when we're seeing, particularly in Queensland, what I'd call single product enterprises struggling with debt, looking at these options. What plans are there to educate producers in the ramifications of these contracts? Because the contracts we're seeing, people are locking in country for 100 years. They're getting a windfall up front, and in some contracts that's it. Other contracts they'll be paid money every couple of years for whatever. But you know, to just dismiss it by saying, well, there's lots of other initiatives and carbon credits isn't the main game. Well, unfortunately, in some parts of Queensland, it is becoming the main game. That's part one of the question. Part two is, I note on your website with who do I contact, a couple of legal firms and Ben Keogh's mob and whatever. Who determines who is the people to contact? Because it just seems odd. There's more than 2 legal firms in the country.
Yeah, they're really good questions. Thanks for that. So I'll take the second question first. It's basically open for anyone to list. If you've got an organisation and you think you can help, and you're a legitimate organisation, you've got an ABN, it's not very much more strenuous than that, but it's in no way restricted. I think there's a message at the top. It should be a little bit more prominent, saying if you want to list your organisation or even your individual enterprise there, please get in touch, because we want this to be a valuable research source for everybody. The organisation I work for is not looking to make a commercial return of any description on this. We've been funded by the government, so please do, if you do have any advice, or you've got friends that have small businesses that can offer counselling or auditing or whatever it may be, please get in touch and I'll get it on there quick smart. I guess your first question is a really good one, and I guess the reason that I phrase it like that, and I guess I didn't want to play down carbon credits too much, but some conversations I have, I get an impression that, I guess, carbon credits and the carbon industry is being expected in some areas to sort of be the messiah and come down, and suddenly farmers are going to get really significant checks in the mail from doing very, very little. And I think the expectation in some areas and with some people, and often a lot of this is about breaking down misinformation, is to bring those expectations down and talk about saying, yeah, absolutely, there are farmers out there that have got a decent financial return with CFI projects, but it's absolutely not for everybody, and it's not going to be a situation that it's applicable for everybody. And I think it's better to, as I say, under promise and over deliver. Do your research, and there are real opportunities out there. There are people making a financial return, but you need to make sure that your particular farming system, your property, is suitable for that.
I apologise. Who are the resources to give this information? Because what we're seeing, and as a lender, what we're seeing is people getting a massive windfall up front, locking stuff in for the way they're going to farm for the next 100 years. And if they've locked into credits and then they decide that they don't want to farm the way they're locked into, then there's going to be financial comeback on them there as well. So as a lender, we're seeing our potential security position being eroded, but who's actually giving them independent advice on this? Because these are more than life-changing; these are generational changing decisions.
Yeah, I think one part of that, which is looking more than likely to change with proposed legislation, is that 100 years there'll be an option of a 25-year policy, so it's still a significant amount of time, but it's looking like that will become an option. So obviously 25 years is it's sort of within one generation. You can it's very difficult, but you can sort of forecast out in your head to some degree what's going to happen in 25 years. So hopefully that opens up the option and more people to consider it. And currently the legislation is that that carbon, trying to think of the right term, but I can't think of it, it's related to your actual property deed in a lot of situations, and that makes a lot of lenders, my understanding, don't have financial advice sort of qualifications, but that makes a lot of lenders a little bit wary, and my understanding is there's a good chance that will change, all the options around that. So I guess the options I see under the new proposed policy myself is that they're trying to make it a lot more flexible and provide more options. So as for who to contact, I think hopefully the website will grow, and we do have a few contacts on the website. The company that I actually work for, and I'm sort of not here for commercial return, but there are companies out there like the company I work for, Climate Friendly, who've worked with farmers and actually have got projects through. And the nature of the contracts and the projects is that they're very technical, and they involve very long and arduous contracts with terms that I don't understand. So just make sure that you've got a trusted legal advisor of some description. Make sure you run any sort of contract I get. It's a bit of a common sense really. Run anything by them, and make sure that what people are signing up for is something that is right for them, and isn't something that's unscrupulous or they're uncomfortable about. And unfortunately, most of the people out there, like the big legal firms and stuff, well, not unfortunately, I should say, fortunately, guys like, I know the guys at Norton Rose who have been into carbon farming for a very, very long time, and they are a big sort of, I guess, a big scary legal firm, but they do have really good resources. They put out under the same funding run as these projects are under. They put out at a legal guide, which it's still quite complex, and it's available for free. It's the Norton Rose CFI and Contracts Legal Guide, I think is the full name. It's available for free. They've printed out thousands of copies, and it's also available online. So that's a good start. And what we find is it might even be a little bit potentially too complex and a little bit legalistic, but if you give that to your trusted financial advisor or legal advisor, that'll actually help them as well.
Hello, I've got a question for Peter. Just with your results from the carbon emissions, can you tell me how they actually measured those emissions?
Short answer, no, I've got no idea. No, look, there was about, I don't know how many scientists, there was about 4 or 5 different guys came out and looked at things and checked things and modelled things, and so, look, I don't know. There is a project that those data come out of a project abstract that's been published, so I mean, if you were chasing, I could organise to get that email to you, but the actual science of it, straight over my head. No, it was more based on pasture modelling and that sort of thing, so yeah.
I might be able to help a little bit. That I suspect Pete didn't have a whole lot of igloos where his cows were and capturing all the emissions. It's all done on modelling. Some of that grass grow type modelling that I mentioned, there's a whole range of emissions models like farm gas, which is the AFI one, for example. So there's a number of those, and the University of Melbourne have got some really sophisticated models that a lot of them originated out of the dairy industry, to be honest, but are being applied now to the broadacre industries.
Yep. My question is to Peter. I heard you say about you've got the Angus bulls, but what were the heifers? What breed was the heifer? What breed are your heifers?
What breed are the cattle?
Yeah, your heifers. You said Angus bulls because they were small and calving.
Yeah, we use Angus bulls over our maiden heifers, so we join them as yearlings. They're pretty much a composite breed. We started with a bit of everything, so I think we had everything from sort of Brahfords to Brahmins to whatever. But over time, we use Angus bulls over them as heifers, and then we put Charolais bulls over the older cows. And like our market is a feedlot market, so we're really focused on trying to get them to weight as quickly as possible. So that's why the Charolais are there, really to put that weight on. And yeah, like if we were trying to grow bullocks or something, I think we'd probably struggle getting the fat cover in our country. Like it'd probably take too long to get them to get that fat cover. But yeah, no, look. Angus do a brilliant job. Like with we don't have any calving trouble. Just zero. And obviously in where we are, we're not out there checking them all that sort of stuff. So Angus do a brilliant job on the calving side. Charolais do a brilliant job on getting them to weight quicker. But we're going to get to a point where our cattle probably will end up two Charolais, 2 Angusy. We're going to have to cross back at some point in the future. I've just been talking to a couple of the bull. 2, yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah, we'll have to cross back at a point in time. Like if you looked at our cows now, like you know, I mean, you do, you know, we tend to probably trade cattle a little bit as well. Like our numbers sort of go up and down depending on season. So we have our core breeders, but we'll trade, and sometimes you end up with breeders coming in via that, you know. So sometimes that, but normally, yeah, our main breeders, they'll get to a point where they're too Charolais, too Angus, and we'll have to cross back out of that. Yeah, for sure.
I have a question from Twitter, and because I get to read it out, I get a Freddo. We've got a tweet from Ali G in the Dairy, and she would like to know, whoever would like to answer this, your view on dairy and CO2. There are low CO2 gene cows in the pipeline, she says. So dairying and emissions, who'd like to tackle that one, about what that industry is doing?
Yeah, look, there's apart from the research that's been mentioned today, there's a whole lot of research that's going on. Some is particularly in the dairy and also in beef industries, is looking at, you know, is it possible to genetically or to breed for low emission animals? So, and the findings are, or the indications are, that that is very much the case. And the dairy industry is probably a little bit in front of the meat industry in that regard. But certainly there's a lot of work going on in that. There's a lot of work going on in looking at, can we actually transform the rumen to reduce emissions? Now that's a little bit harder, of course, but there's a lot of work going on in those sorts of areas as well, because as Pete said, you know, any emissions that are coming out in, say, methane out of a rumen, it's a lost energy source. So, you know, there's work going on in that. There's also work going on, or has happened in the past, of looking at, you know, is it possible for us to breed animals that might have higher resistance to heat stress, but still high fertility? Because, you know, obviously as temperature goes up, then fertility reduces. So there's all those sorts of areas. So that's a really long answer to a short question, sorry. But yes, there's a lot of work going on. And I'll just make it, and this sounds bad, but there needs to be a hell of a lot more work continue in these sorts of areas. That research is going to be really important to provide some of the solutions to some of the challenges that we've got at the moment.
Do you mean breeding specifically, or?
No, look, it can be breeding in terms of genetics for animals. It can be in terms of looking at alternative pasture species, deeper rooted, more water tolerant, those sorts of things. I think I personally have a view that we don't know enough yet about how do we expect farmers to deal with extreme events. You know, what are the triggers that say to Pete when he gets to day 8 of a 46 plus situation, geez, I better do something now, and what am I going to do? You know, we just don't know how to respond to some of those things.
And before we go, can I just ask you one question? We heard Pete explain that 10 days of 40 plus. If there was a 21-year-old farmer starting out in Longreach at the moment, say if Pete experiences, well, you've only experienced one of those events, haven't you? What's a 21-year-old who might have 40 years on a property in Longreach? Is he likely to experience 2 of those 40 plus summers, or where there's 10 days in a row, or 3 in 40 years? What would you tell a 21-year-old about what he could expect in Longreach?
Look, I think it's, I'll use Rob's analogy that is it a risk that this 21-year-old farmer at Longreach might experience more than, you know, one turn or one cycle of plus 40 degree or plus 46 degree days? The answer is absolutely it's a risk, and therefore you would need to take that, like you do, whether it's an insurance policy or whatever, you'd need to take that into your farm management business, because just again, historically looking back, and we can't tell what the future is going to be, but the science is very compelling that the likelihood is that we're going to see a lot more of these extreme temperature, extreme climatic conditions going forward that we have to have be prepared for, and also skills to deal with.
Well, thank you everybody. Thanks for the questions from the floor, and thanks for your attention. And I hope that you've realised there's a lot of info out there, and that no matter what's happening in Canberra, in the ag world, carbon is an issue, and there's heaps of info and lots of programs out there. So come and meet, have a chat with us now. We're all going off to have our free steak sandwiches, aren't we, Heidi? Yes. So, yeah, the boys can answer lots of your questions as well. So thanks very much, and thanks to the panel.